Hi, everybody. Hello, I'm Shannon Kaye. This is Sabrina Alfin, who I have the great pleasure of interviewing today. Do you have feedback? Or is that just me? No? Okay. So I just want to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this. It's been quite a journey coming from a physical event that SF Design Week does so beautifully to this whole virtual kind of space that it's still very exciting in a way. Sabrina and I have spent a lot of time talking about all things technology, but also design as we've put this thing together. So thanks for doing this with me, Sabrina. And so I wanted to just run through a couple of quick things before we get started. We're going to do some fun things today. We're going to take a poll of some color schemes at the end of the presentation. So we want you to tell us what your favorite color combinations are. And for anybody who wants to email me, skaye@kellymoore.com, after the presentation, I can send out to you our brand new color deck. This is our essential set with 100 of our most popular paint colors for inside and out. And I also have this really fun, just little interior trend card. We've talked about this a lot together, Sabrina and I. Just have some fun color palettes for you. So if you just email me, I'm happy to just send these out to you. Send me your address and we'll get that out in the mail. And just show you some of the fun things we're working on at Kelly Moore. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide so I can introduce you to Sabrina and we can start chatting. Sabrina is the product of an artistic family. She spent 20 plus years on Madison Avenue managing big brands, pitching big ideas, and never losing sight of the big picture. And then in 2009, she channeled all of that work and life experience into a design degree and state certification. And she brought it all home into her own interior design practice, which she launched in 2011. And today, what I love, this is my favorite thing about Sabrina's bio, is that she really recognizes all of the people it takes to make these things happen. The architects, the craftspeople, the engineers, contractors. There's a whole village that makes a beautiful interior come to life, and you really rely on people to do what they do best, to make your work fulfill your customer's vision or your client's vision. So again, thanks for being here, Sabrina. You're on mute. Your voice is on mute, Sabrina. Can you unmute yourself? There, I think you got it. Yeah. Oh, the mute thing go on. Maybe you can click it again.
I don't see where it is.
There you go. There you go. Oh, it's muted again.
Hey guys, this is Vince from the tech team. Sabrina, it looks like you might have Crowdcast open in a second tab. Can you just make sure any other tabs are closed? Because we're getting feedback when I unmute you. And thank you guys. This whole streaming paradigm is new to everyone, so we're just
yeah.
dealing with things as they come up.
Yeah. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, I think we're good. We have a lot to talk about, but let's just start with this first image. We were going to do a whole vignette for you at the new Kelly Moore Color Studio. And then when this became virtual, Sabrina still decided to put together kind of an ideal room, a really fun, playful room that sort of exemplified our color of the year for 2020, which is Sun God. So let's just start with the first question, Sabrina. What role does color play for you in design?
Well, I think in general, it's all about setting a mood, right? I mean, and when you're talking about a color of the year like Sun God, which is so bright and very, very cheerful, you kind of have to think about, well, are you really just going to use it intermittently, or are you really going to be big and splashy about it? And so, you know, for this particular vignette, as Shannon said, this was the concept for what we were actually physically going to create in the studio if this was going to be a live in-person event. And so what we tried to do was to really kind of make this as bold and interesting as possible, because that's the point, right? We're in Kelly Moore's studio, so we wanted to really use color to its greatest degree.
Right.
In general, color is setting a mood. We want to, we have to decide whether we want to be energetic, whether we want to be more calm. It really just depends on what the goal is for the space. So you really have to sort of decide what your vision is and what your goals are before you decide how color will play a part.
Right. So if you were going to describe maybe this client, this is your kind of dream vision, but how do you think a client would say that they wanted to feel and operate in a space if this was the result of the room that you created for them?
Yeah, I mean, I really sort of see this as being pretty young and hip. I don't know that a 50-something like me would be, yes, I am that old. A 50-something like me would be the person to be in this space. But right. I think this is youthful. There's a lot of interesting pattern play here. There's some unusual color combinations, like mixing that sort of blushy clay color with this bright yellow. Right. And that more terracotta color with charcoal and light blue. These are colors that you wouldn't necessarily think would go together, but they work, and I love it. I love the depth of feeling in this because it's so rich and interesting.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a similar question, but we're kind of talking about what the impact of color has on design. Oops, there we go. The impact that color has on design. And, I know for some people, they really do like a full space of color, a color that inspires them or focuses them or helps them feel comfy. And then there's times where just a little piece of color is all you need to make a space feel maybe welcoming or like have a human kind of life and scale to it. So for you, how do you think color impacts a design, and how do your customers or your clients talk about it when it comes to these projects they bring you?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times for this room in particular, we were really trying to go with a kind of a more masculine look for their master bedroom. And we started with that piece of artwork that is over the bed. That was something they had previously owned. And I said, well, let's really dive into that, no pun intended, because it is a water picture, har har. But let's really take that and blow that out as much as we possibly can. Right. And by using that rich teal as this, accent for playing off of other more interesting and masculine colors like browns and yellows and black even, it gives us this really layered approach. And I think it has a sophistication about it, and yet it's not taking itself too seriously either. Right. And I think, that's very much who these clients are. They don't take themselves too seriously. They're pretty joyful people, and they're not into a lot of frou-frou kinds of things. And so, having a lot of detail and decoration and ruffles and that kind of stuff just kind of wasn't their thing. So, but going in this slightly more bohemian direction with the patterns and colors seemed to make a lot of sense. So from an emotional point of view, you want to walk into this space and say, I really like this. There's something very harmonious about it, and yet it doesn't feel too boring either.
Right. Yeah. Well, it is interesting. You do have analogous colors, right? You've kind of got greens into yellows, and yet I think it's adding the textures and layers and the materials in there that keep it from feeling like a color scheme.
That's correct.
Yeah. Let's look at the next slide. I think it's quite different from this. So this is obviously a much more beachy style, and the giveaway is the color, right? It's that really kind of watery sea color that's a tiny bit blue, tiny bit green. So when we talk about being inspired by color, are you like walking around looking at things in your life experience and little colors strike you and you think, how can I use that? Or do you have a customer say, I've always wanted a beach cottage, or I've always loved blue, that's what I want in here, and then you have to kind of tap into their ideas for inspiration? How does inspiration work for you?
Well, for this particular project, this is a beach house down in Pacific Grove on the Monterey Peninsula. And we very much wanted it to be this sort of vacation respite kind of a place where you just walk in the front door and you just go, you know, like you leave the rest of the world behind and all you want is just to be surrounded by these sort of watery, sandy, beachy kind of colors. And that was very much by design. You know, we wanted to sort of make the inside an extension of the outside. And you've probably heard many architects and designers use that kind of language, but it's actually quite true that your setting is very much an indicator of a direction in which you would like to go. So I'm often inspired by the setting of a project. I'm also inspired by objects that the client might have, for example, like, you know, sometimes clients have beautiful antiques or they have a fabulous rug, Turkish rug or something like that. And you're saying, okay, we gotta build the room around this thing because it's just the most gorgeous thing you've ever seen. And so I don't think it's not like I'm not like Newton where I'm getting hit on the head by an apple. I go, aha, you know, it's much more of an organic thing depending on what it is that I'm working with.
What I think is interesting about this room, though, is to me it really shows how color is a tool. So there are other tools and techniques that designers use to create a mood, a feeling, or even just, you know, how to support an activity in a space. And you could take out all the layers in here, the sisal rug, the flaccati, you could take all those pieces out, and just those walls would tell you what this space is supposed to be. But
right. And I also think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, then you're just kind of pushing that idea then with the other pieces that you put in, which is comfy layers, soft materials, bright and sunny objects that are catching the light. So I think it's interesting that color is one of many tools. It's not the end all. You know, it's not the only thing you're working with or starting with as a designer. Would you agree?
Yes, I think that's very true. And I think a lot of people talk about interior design as a series of layers that you apply to a space to give it more depth and more interest and more visual interest. Color is one of those tools in the toolbox. You know, texture is another, fabric is another, and even, you know, the specific pieces. Like in this case, we've got that amazing mid-century modern chair, Danish modern chair that was an original that we had recovered and refinished. And it's this beautiful little piece of sculpture that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the room.
Right. So line and shape and silhouette and scale.
Exactly.
You have a whole toolbox when you come into a space like this.
Very much so. Very much so.
Take a look. Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Let's take a look at the next slide. Now this is like kind of going the opposite direction. There's obviously still color in here, but this is so different in terms of the saturation, sort of the larger impact. I think in a way you'd walk into this space and you would see impact because it is so monochromatic, but it's so neutral. It's very, very quiet. So this must be, my guess is, a client who maybe has a really busy lifestyle, high pressure career, and when they come home, they just want to take off their shoes and just come right down into a comfortable, calm space. Am I accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a very good description. And, you know, this is my take on a twist on grays and beiges. Instead of using the typical grays and beiges that are normally seen in what we consider to be neutral interiors, you can do neutral in a tone-on-tone sort of a way that mixes the layers of similar colors and kind of puts them together so that you can sort of there's nothing that really kind of screams at you.
Right.
And in order to keep it from getting boring, we bring in pattern, we bring in texture, we bring in some objects, we bring in art, all these different things that keep it from looking a little too one note. Mm-hmm. So, I have a thing about neutral interiors, and I sort of feel like there are a lot of people that do neutral interiors that don't layer it enough, that they don't give it enough visual interest, so it kind of looks bland and boring. Mm-hmm. And this is our attempt at not doing that. Our attempt at making it neutral without it being beige, and neutral while still giving it some visual oomph with the darker indigo and the tape trims and the batik patterns on the pillows.
Right. I want to ask you a really specific question about this particular room. When you take a room like the first room with the really rich green wall and the photograph that was the obvious inspiration for that space, then everything kind of seemed to feed to that without having to be literal about any translation. You didn't have to have anything else that looked like water. You didn't have to have water fabric to connect to the water photo. You know what I mean? So in this case, where you have a very calm, serene, textural layered piece, how did you make decisions then about like the floral pillows? Why that particular print versus anything else you could have chosen? Why was that the right choice for this room?
Well, when we did the mood boards for this particular project, I had it in my head that I kind of wanted to do a modern twist on chinoiserie. Yeah. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term chinoiserie, it means that there are a lot of patterns and that came from Asia that were adopted by the French back in the 1700s. And then it became sort of this British, this whole European thing that then came to America. Right. And it's a lot of different, you'll see those blue and white Chinese vases and jars, and right. You'll see very bold wallpaper that has very intricate Asian looking patterns. But we didn't want to go that bold because she's not that bold of a person. So right. I got her to kind of concede a little bit by bringing in these fabrics that kind of nodded to that without it taking over the room. You'll see right. Like the middle panel on that center pillow has like a bamboo pattern to it. And those pillows on either end have batik. And so it kind of has that feeling of one of those Chinese jars without it actually being that right. literal. Does that make sense?
It does. I even like how the little bowl on the table, it almost looks like the feet of like one of those Asian dogs or dragons, that yeah. You're just kind of alluding to this in a really subtle way. And I think sometimes the room sort of calls for like hints versus big, bold statements. So I would say this isn't a big, bold statement room, and yet there's like this cohesiveness to everything you chose anyway. I think when a lot of people go to a neutral space, they don't realize they still need a center point for the design. Where are we going? What is the look and feel? And right. So I think where a lot of people think, oh, neutral is easier because it's just neutral, but in some ways it's harder.
Yeah, it can be. But, I tend to be, unlike many designers, I tend to be a little linear myself. Mm-hmm. And so I like to start from a place of setting the direction before we pick anything, right? So we have a mood board that is showing this kind of feeling that we're trying to evoke. And that's what they gravitate towards. If that's one option that we give them and they say, oh, I really like the way that looks, then we start pulling together all the pieces and colors and patterns to execute on that.
Right.
So, in this case too, we were using some very classic furniture shapes. And so this transitional space will really kind of stand the test of time.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's not at all trendy or, you can be in this space 10 years from now and it won't feel dated.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And a room like this does allow you to update it. So if you
Correct.
put your money in the furnishings and use really good quality furniture and fabrics and materials, you can then change out artwork, change out pillows, and not just in a superficial holiday way, but you really can kind of move and grow with the space. And so as a career changes or as the people in that home start to change, you can really update the space without having to start over.
Correct.
Right. That's great. So let's take another look. Again, this is like completely the opposite of what we were just looking at.
Went from very calm and low energy to like, whoa.
Yeah. And we were just talking about this offline too, about how color trends change and move so much. And one of the things that we're noticing at Kelly Moore is that our historic colors are always, you can always use them. They always work, but sometimes this real push towards historic colors comes in, and maybe it's needing a sense of comfort and stability. But we're talking about old colors here, really old, very traditional, and even a very traditional color scheme. But how did you decide to use this in a way that looked fresh and modern and new again?
Well, just taking a look at the color scheme itself, the palette is, it's practically a primary palette, right? You've got red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
And then you've got a little bit of yellow and a little bit of gray. And, if you were to look at that palette without knowing that picture behind it was there, you might say, oh, what a great color scheme for a little boy's room, or what a great color scheme for, a house on Martha's Vineyard or something.
Right.
So something a little preppy and Northeast.
Right.
But
right.
I looked at these colors and I said, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of go in that sort of Asian global direction rather than go in a, all-American kind of a feeling, right. and just bring in all these patterns and textures that really enhance that. And I think one of the things that I do well on behalf of my clients is picking coordinating fabrics that are the correct scale that work with each other.
Right.
So even though you're mixing colors and types of patterns, the fact that the scales work and the colors are complementary, it kind of pulls it all together. You've got the dark navy toile and you have the yellow toile as well. You've got the elephants. It works. It kind of puts it all together, and it seems to, again, give it that very layered look. And then when you combine that with all the rattan and the woven woods, it just gives it that much more visual interest and texture.
In the 80s, when people really, obviously there's always been different ways of mixing prints. But I remember in the 80s, there was this, big trend to put florals and stripes together. And anytime people try to kind of create simple rules.
Yeah, the Schumacher and Waverly look, very much so in that direction.
Yeah, and even Laura Ashley a little bit. And they try to create a formula so that people can kind of replicate that for their homes. But what would you say are kind of maybe the techniques or the things that you're thinking about when you're layering different patterns together? Does it have to do with scale, depth, theme, color? How do you put different pieces together?
Boy, that's a hard one to articulate because it's one of those things that you kind of know it when you see it.
Yeah.
But in general, I tend to have, when I go shopping for fabric, I tend to pick the paint swatches first. Or I have an area rug that I'm working with, and I take that with me. I take a sample of that with me.
Okay.
And for me, it's so I don't really pick these things in a vacuum. I don't normally pick the fabric first and then find the rug or the color. It's usually the other way around because it's much easier to take a paint swatch and bring it to the showrooms to take and look through all the racks of fabric.
Right.
And again, we've already established the look that we're going for. So then I don't have to look through everything. I'm looking for certain things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But it seems too like, I think one of the things that makes these kinds of layers successful is when you don't try to perfectly match things together. So like the pillows in the back, the kind of maybe ECAT pattern, that the red in that is a little bit deeper and truer than the rusty orangey red on the elephants. And so you're kind of looking at as a family how these pieces go together versus if this pillow has red in it, this other pattern has to have the exact same red in it. It seems like you're really playing with, like in this case, you've got the elephants and the lattice work that are very geometric, very perfectly lined up. And then the bolsters and the cushion have a little more of a free-form feel to them. So you're kind of looking at contrast. And then again, also not a perfect match, but something similar that connects these pieces.
Yeah, and it can be a similar feeling. It could be a coordinating feeling. I also think too that that when I have colors that are not quite the same but work together, they tend to be in the same tonal range. So, like if you were looking at a paint chip that had the dark green at the bottom and the very, very light green at the top. Right. Somewhere on that scale, those colors will be on that card. Does that make sense? Yep. So it may not be the exact depth of tone, but it's in the same range so that it doesn't feel like it's going to clash.
Right. That's great. I have to ask before we move on. It looks like this is a patio. It's a porch. It looks like that's outside siding, the wall behind.
Yes.
How did you decide to choose that color as the background color?
So that gray, I wanted something that was kind of a backdrop, something that wasn't going to compete with all the fun fabrics that we were putting together. There was, what you can't see is also that there was a brick floor on the patio that we had actually whitewashed. And it was just a nice place to, a nice platform to bring in all these colors and textures. If you go to my website, you can see this project, and there's actually some living walls in this space as well. In addition to lots of antique objects. And so we just felt like with a lot of the stuff going on in this space, we didn't want to draw too much attention away from the things that were inside the room.
Right. It seems to me that it's not a rule, but it seems to be sort of a natural combination that if you choose, a bolder color, then I don't know if you can see this, you might choose more neutral furnishings or pieces for it. And then if you choose a more neutral background, then you have a little freedom to kind of play with the pieces that you set in that color. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but as we saw on the first slide, it could just be the opposite. We could go equally bold with the colors of the furniture as we did with the walls. And so I don't think there's a rule of thumb, and I just think it's what look are you trying to achieve, and where do you want the eye to focus?
Exactly.
So in this case, we wanted the eye to focus on this settee that has all these wonderful awesome fabrics on it. So that's what we did.
Yeah, great. Let's look at the next slide. So this looks like a project in the works, something in the making.
This was a project that was delayed due to COVID. I was literally going to start demo on this kitchen back in late February. Wow. And then, you know, when all of the COVID stuff started to happen, the clients who have 2 young school-aged children were like, there's no way we're ripping apart our kitchen while we have to homeschool our kids for the foreseeable future. Right. So we're putting this on hold, but this is essentially the design. They live in an old craftsman house up in Bernal Heights. And we opted to go with this really interesting, it's a colorful but subdued kind of palette using sort of a grayed out green. And that's my cat who wants to join us. And pumpkin oranges, and we brought in a little bit of yellow in the bench seat over in the breakfast area. And so, you know, we wanted, and again, back to the conversation that you and I were having before this started, was I'm very much of a mind that kitchens should be as colorful as the rest of the house. The days of all white kitchens are just not happening anymore. Right. And I'm sort of fundamentally opposed. So in this case, we kind of did a two-tone. We did a two-tone treatment with the green on the bottom and the white cabinets at the top. And we brought in the pumpkin orange for the tiles for the backsplash, which are going to be these gorgeous fire clay subway tiles, which are fantastic. So,
what do you say about like if a client is resistant to putting something that's a little more permanent in the space in such a bold color? Does that take a lot of convincing, or do you think people see the value of putting their stamp, their personality stamp in a space in such a permanent and bold way?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of times what it boils down to is they have to really love it. You know, they have to really love the color, because you're right. You know, you're not going to rip out your tile. It's easy to paint a wall. It's not so easy to rip out tile. Right. So from that perspective, we really try to be subtle about the color. And if we're going to use brighter colors, we want them to be sort of done in a more accent sort of way, so that it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming. Right. In this case, we think the orange like really accents the cabinetry very well, and doesn't feel like it's it's not overtaking the space by any stretch of the imagination. Right. So this is, so getting back to, can old colors become fresh and new again? I mean, these are basically the colors of the food we eat. Which is appropriate for a kitchen. Yeah. And those sage greens and those pumpkin oranges and those squash yellows, these are colors that have been around for a long, long time. Yeah. And now all we're saying is that, when you use historical color palettes, the reason that they're in the historical color palette is because they've been around forever. And so by putting them in now, they'll never go out of style. Right, right. They will never be not on trend, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think part of what makes an old color feel new again is applying it in a new way, or putting some sort of a contemporary element to it. So putting it on contemporary cabinets, or putting it on fresh fabrics, or choosing fresh fabrics that have those colors. You're still kind of rooted in tradition or comfort, and yet you don't feel like it's a dated space.
Right. Yeah. And that's, and yet we still wanted to feel classic in this case. So we wanted it to fit with the architecture of the house. We didn't want it to feel like it was just glommed on to, the home that they live in. We wanted it to feel very much like it had always been there.
Yeah. Have you ever had a client just really resist an idea like this backsplash that you just knew it was so right for this space, that it would define the space and create that unique stamp to the room? And have you had clients just resist so much? And if you have, when do you decide to go, all right, we'll just go blue or gray, you know? And when do you say, look, you just got to have it, and you push them?
Sometimes I'll like to compromise. So for example, and I don't have a slide of this in here because I don't have pictures of it yet, but I recently did a kitchen down in Redwood City where we had, you know, the basic white subway tile for the backsplash. Mm-hmm. But what we did was we got a dark slate blue star and cross pattern tile that we put right over the range. And by having, you know, some contrast, and it's just a little bit different than everything else that was going on, they felt like they could say yes to it because it wasn't the entire thing. You know, it was a small area that they felt that we could do without them feeling like it's too much, you know?
Right.
And also, you know, not for nothing, when you're using handmade tile like fire clay, for example, it's not cheap. And so you have to sometimes be judicious about how you're using it so that it doesn't break the budget either. Yeah. So there are little tricks of the trade that we do use to get those elements in there without going over budget.
Right. This looks like it's a fairly small kitchen, a fairly efficient little space. If it were a much bigger room, do you think you would have stuck with those tiles?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Okay. And I think I would have, you know, obviously if it was a bigger space, there are other features and elements that I would have added, but this is basically a galley kitchen that we've tried to open up between the dining room and the kitchen area. Right. And so, you know, we were somewhat limited in how we could configure the space, but still get all the features in there that they wanted.
Right, right. While we're on this picture, I want to mention a couple of things. The first one is all the color schemes that we've been seeing in the right-hand corner are Kelly Moore colors, and those are all our paint colors. So we'll show you all of her color schemes in a moment. But just in case you were curious about where you get those particular colors, those are Kelly Moore colors. But we had a question come in since we're here that I think is really interesting. Someone wrote, Laura De La Torre said, which colors, oh wait, but there's one before that, hang on. No, one says, your renderings are beautiful. Can you talk about your process for creating them?
Well, my deep, dark little secret is that I don't actually do my own renderings. I have a guy, you know, as the owner of my company, there are certain things I want to put my time into and other things I do not. I do all my own drafting of AutoCAD drawings and I do all my own elevations. But when it comes to 3D renderings, I know that there are other people who can do them faster and better than I can. Right. And so I have actually found a couple of people actually, who do really great work and can do it so quickly that it doesn't pay for me to do it myself. Right. So, and quite, you know, it's one of those things that clients don't always want to pay for themselves. And so, yeah, I mean, if I had a giant studio with 15 people working for me, I probably would have somebody on staff that did that for me. But as it is, I do outsource those things.
Are these renderings done on the computer, or are they done old-fashioned with pens and markers and then scanned? Do you know?
I do know. The person who does these starts with SketchUp, and then I think he brings them into either Photoshop or some other rendering software, and he's using a hand pad. I don't know what they're called. They're, you know, a tablet that allows him kind of create that sketchy sort of rendered look. So the bones are done in SketchUp, and the rendering is done electronically to make it look like it was hand rendered.
Okay. It brings up a really good business point too, where on the one hand with your customers, you have to help them understand where to put their most money in their projects, right? So what is the best investment of their money? Should you spend more money on a tile and a little less money on a floor or a window treatment? You have to kind of pick and choose sometimes. And I think the same is true for business, right? You have to decide for yourself, what are my strengths and what will serve me better to hand off to someone who can do it better than me or love doing it more than me or have the equipment I don't have. So I think it's really smart to use this kind of an opportunity to have someone create these pieces for you because it still looks like you. I mean, they obviously are
Well, they're my
great.
designs, and they're my designs, and I basically gave them everything that they needed to create the thing. It's not like I said, "Oh, can you do a rendering for me? I wanted to look like this." I mean, I literally sent them, you know, all the pictures of all the chairs and all the pictures of all the lighting and da-da-da. So it's still my design. I'm just not doing the physical execution.
Yeah. So you're providing them all the pieces that they need to recreate what you plan to create in real life. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. We have another question, and it's interesting. You and I, again, we're just talking about this. And I'm talking about a lot right now. We're already starting to choose what we see as color trends for 2021. So this question says, which colors are trending right now, and how do you determine that? So what's your take on that?
I really think that jewel tones are going to be a big thing and kind of are a big thing. You're seeing lots of dark greens. You're seeing a lot of dark magentas, even the little touches of it. Not, the whole room doesn't have to be that, but I feel like, people are, I sort of have a theory that, because we've been sort of in lockdown mode for such a long time, that people are kind of looking for more energy in their spaces as opposed to wanting to relax in their spaces.
Right.
And I kind of feel like that is having an influence on what colors are trending right now.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like, we work a lot with our sales reps. We do color training for our sales reps and for companies, developers, people that want help with that. And a rep one time said something to me like, just asked me like, well, what colors are trending right now? And I said, you should tell me, because you're the one who's out there driving around talking to your clients all the time about what they see. And so I think determining color trends is about looking around and really paying attention to the things that you see. And it doesn't specifically have to be, I'm seeing all dark brown woodwork in rooms right now. It could be, I see fashion is going full skirts and bright yellow. And that doesn't mean that you're, being contrived about what you put together, just letting yourself be inspired and connect the dots as you see them. Like, wait, I see yellow over here. I see yellow over there too. Oh, wait, is this a trend? Is something happening here? So I don't think that we as creatives decide what the color is or determine what the trend is. I think we watch. And then of course our clients are asking for colors because they're seeing it.
Right. And my feeling about color in general is that it has to fit the space and it has to be indicative of the client's lifestyle. So, and the way that you find that out is very much by talking to them and understanding who they are and what they gravitate towards and, how they live their lives. And I think there are certain colors that lean, whether it's an informal space or a more formal space, there are colors that make more sense for more formal spaces, I think.
Yeah. Well, here's another question right along the lines of that. This person asks, when you're picking colors, is there a formula to follow? For example, one main color, two accents, anything more is too much? What do you think?
Boy, that's an interesting question. I try to have sort of a main grounding color, if you will, followed by sort of a secondary or a secondary main color, for lack of a better description, and then maybe 2 to 3 accent colors, depending on what it is. And I think that, you know, and again, obviously this isn't all pink color because you're not going to have 57 different colors in one room, walls. But it's allowing you to kind of create, again, those layers. You know, the more color you bring into the space, you got to do it in a way that's judicious, and that doesn't compete with one another. So there's no specific rule of thumb other than, you know, I try to have at least a couple of different accent colors in order to kind of create more interest in the room.
Yeah. I also feel like to the points that you had made earlier about where do you want your eyes to go in the space?
Right.
That sometimes that determines how many colors you're going to use, or if it's going to be a quiet color scheme with a few little bursts of bright color versus one big color that's like kind of a bold statement and everything supports it. I think a lot of it is context. And there's certainly more than one way to design a room. There's several ways, but then when you put in the needs of the client, when you put in the lighting of the region, when you put in, so you have to kind of factor all of those things in and then start determining, am I playing with a really tight palette, or am I playing with something that's really wide and fun and has either room to breathe, or wide and fun and all like shoved together into a space.
And I think too that, you know, a lot will depend on whether you're doing a more monochromatic look or if you're doing something that is definitely more of a mix, because those rules will change depending on what you're going for.
We have another question that says, is it accurate to say Kellymore paints with food names would be appropriate for the kitchen? I love that question, Dale.
Again, I think it's, you know, sure, definitely. I mean, as you see here, we've got, you know, those are pretty edible looking colors. You've got sort of a celery green and a pumpkin orange and a squashy yellow. And they would look great, but a lot will depend also on what your other rooms look like. And are you creating flow between one room and another? And that's something we also didn't really cover today, is that, you know, you can look at all these color palettes in a vacuum, but the truth of the matter is that it also has to work with the rest of the house. You can't, I mean, you could, if you wanted to, you know, design your house like the Madonna Inn down the coastline, where every room is like a different theme. But most people don't want that. They want to make sure that there's a flow to the space and that there is the colors work together, and they can be different colors, but they do have to work with each other.
Yeah, and I think they have to work for the client. That if the client really likes warm colors, which a lot of food colors are, then they're going to love those colors in their kitchen, but they're also going to love them in the living room. And it's funny, if I could name all Kellymore paint colors, I would have. We have some pretty crazy names, and everyone knows that. But there, you do start to see reference points. You know, you do start to see that colors refer to an apple green or something like that. And when you see it in the proper space, like a kitchen, you're like, exactly, that's right. You know, you make that connection to it. So I like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do we have another slide before we do our poll?
I don't think so. Questions? I think it's time to do our poll, and then we can open it up to other questions.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do the poll really quickly, and then I'll get back to the questions that are coming in. And thanks so much. These are great questions. I love that everyone's so engaged. So these are all of the color palettes that Sabrina used in the rooms and that you saw through the presentation. So we just want to do a quick poll and ask you, which is your favorite?
And the voting starts now. So go ahead. There's a little button at the bottom of your screen that says polls. So if you click on that, you can start voting.
We'll answer a couple of questions while people get a chance to vote. So another question I think really relates to your bio. This person, Jenny, asks, I'm currently an art director with experience in lifestyle photo styling. Do you have any advice for transitioning to an interior design career?
Wow, that's a great question. So just a quick little background on me. I was not on the creative side of the business when I worked in advertising. I was on the client management side of the business. And so for me personally, I felt, even though I'm sort of like, have absorbed a lot of this stuff just based on who my family is and the life experience I have had, I didn't feel like I had the artistic and design language I needed in order to really feel confident that this was something I could do well. Right. And so for me, it meant going back to school. Now, if the person who's asking the question already has an art background and you've already done the design thing where you understand color schemes, you understand composition, you understand all of that, I don't think that there's much you need to do other than perhaps decide whether or not you're going to get into decorating or design. And the reason I say that is because if you're going to do design, you're going to have to learn how to draft. You're going to have to learn how to do all of that stuff to do space planning. And there's plenty of classes available for that. And I would highly recommend that that's something that you learn how to do. For me, I like to think through my designs when I'm drafting. Yeah. As opposed to, like, oh, well, I'll just pick out these pillows. So there's a difference between styling and design, I think. And you just have to sort of decide what it is that you prefer to do, because you could totally convert what you're doing for magazine styling and photo styling to a straight decorating gig. Yeah. But I think you'd kind of have to come up with some examples of your work in order to be able to kind of move into home interiors.
Right. I think it's natural too to move from one space or one career to another. And, I've transitioned from things too, from decorative painting to TV hosting and makeover, video content, art directing, and then now into color marketing manager. And what I found is that the strength and experience that I gained from that first career path really helped me in my next career path. And so that if I stayed true to the pieces of each of those that I really loved, which for me is color, then I could take those other skills with me: project management, client management, time management. Absolutely. How to create, how to estimate a job and things like that. You get those business skills too as you go along. And then you can fill in with the creative skills or the other business skills that you're lacking to move into that next phase that's interesting for you.
I think that's totally true. And, everything that I learned in advertising was basically transferable to my current career. And, and I think that was very, very helpful. I think it allowed me to leapfrog a little bit. I didn't have to do quite as much working for other people before I went out on my own.
Right. We have a couple more questions. I want to look at the poll really quickly. So if we can bring up that slide again with the colors, I would love to see how we're doing. It looks like the third color scheme is kind of the most popular. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Everybody wants to go to the beach, apparently.
Apparently.
Everybody wants to get out of Dodge and go to the beach.
I wonder what it is about that that's attractive right now. Maybe just like sky, right? Being outside space. Yeah. Let's just do a couple more quick questions. We're almost out of time. We've only got a few minutes left. Here's a question from Margot that asks, how much do you take the room's orientation and natural lighting into consideration? What do you think, Sabrina?
Very much so. I mean, and in fact, sometimes we try to bring more in if we don't already have it.
Right.
Very oftentimes, if I'm designing kitchens, for example, I'll try to build in a skylight if there isn't one already, because natural light is super important, I think, to our mental health and well-being. And
Right.
there's nothing worse than being in an enclosed space that's only has artificial light. So maximizing the windows, maximizing additional natural light through either clear story windows or skylights. I love doing that if the budget allows.
Right.
And then there's also just, general lighting design where you try to create a layered look with lighting between the ambient lighting and the task lighting and decorative lighting. All of those elements have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. We have an interesting question here, and we just have a few more minutes, so maybe this will be our last question because it fits really our whole conversation today. I want to thank everyone for taking the poll and let you know that, again, you can email me, skaye@kellymore.com. And I forgot to mention, so we'll send you, the deck. I'll also send you our little trend card, and we're going to send you the page of Sabrina's color palettes as well. We've printed that out. So we'll just throw all of this in the mail for you if you give me your physical address. I'm happy to send that out just to thank you for taking part in this conversation with us. The last question I think we'll answer very quickly, Sabrina, is someone asked about what kinds of classes or resources or things can you do to learn color theory?
Well, depending on where you are, I would highly recommend just taking a couple of art and design classes at the local community college or even online. I mean, there's so many online class resources these days, either via LinkedIn. I mean, I've taken drawing classes online, as well as a bunch of other things. And so I've taken classes at the local community college. I've taken classes in SketchUp for people who specialize in that. So there's definitely a lot of programs out there that talk to color, whether it's color for interior design or just, art in general. Mm-hmm. And I think it sort of depends on how you want to apply it. So if you guys are based in San Francisco, I highly recommend looking at the course catalog for CCSF, mm-hmm. Or even SF State. And if you're maybe on the peninsula or in the East Bay, some of the local community colleges there too also have great art classes, if you have the time. And if not, then doing it online is always an option.
Yeah, and I think, again, really looking around and self-educating too is awesome. Looking at artists like Joseph Albers and just learning how he would put colors together to experiment and see how they related to each other. Really just sort of paying attention to how artists, designers, and then like textile designers and people, how do they put those together and why? And just really honing in on that. And the beauty of the internet is if you have any questions like what is chinoiserie, you can look it up and really just follow your passion in as niche a way as suits you. So
and I would even say get a membership to your local museums. And go. Every time that there's an art exhibit, there's certainly lots and lots of ways to look at the use of color that way as well.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for bearing with me from our physical presentation to a virtual presentation. Is there anything that you want to add for people or let people know how to get a hold of you?
Sure. I would really encourage you to take a look at my website, which is SabrinaAlfinInteriors.com. And if you're at all interested in joining our mailing list, there's a contact sheet on our contact page. And we would love to stay in touch. I'm always interested in staying in touch with other creative people from other disciplines.
Yeah.
And this whole SF Design Week thing is really a wonderful opportunity to do that, because it's not just about interior design. It's not just about architecture. It's about, user experience, and it's about lots of other things too. And it's always nice to be in touch with other creative professionals. So thank you for joining. It was very, very much fun to do this for you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, SF Design Week. Thank you, Vince. Thanks, everyone who helped us.
Take care.